The last chef in the galaxy. The rain fell on New Shanghai like it had fallen for 200 years, thick, gray, and tasting faintly of metal. Through the droplets streaking down the cracked window, Ashton Nix watched the neon advertisements flicker across the sky. They promised everything: instant happiness in a blue capsule, perfect health in a green one, complete nutrition in something the color of rust. Nobody promised flavor anymore. Nobody even remembered what that meant. Ashton turned from the window and surveyed his restaurant. The memory table read the sign above the door: actual wood, carved by hand, worth more than most starships. The tables were empty. They were always empty at this hour, before the tourists arrived from worlds where rain was a myth and poverty was something studied in historical archives. He moved through the kitniks, his hands performing rituals that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. The knife felt right in his palm, an extension of thought and intention. He selected a tomato from the greenhouse upstairs, one of 17 remaining on Earth, grown in soil that remembered a time before the nutrient accords. "You're wasting time again," said Chen, appearing in the doorway. She was holographic, her form shimmering slightly at the edges. Dead for 12 years, but Ashton had kept her consciousness pattern running in the restaurant's aged computer system. "The 3 p.m. reservation will be here in 40 minutes. "I know." Ashton sliced the tomato. Red juice spread across the cutting board. "Karathi diplomatic envoy. Doesn't say what they want to eat." "They never do," Jen observed. Her form moved closer, studying his hands with an expression Ashton remembered from life: concern mixed with fascination. "You're making the soup." It wasn't the question. The soup was dangerous. The soup was why they'd left Cyron 4 decades ago, why they'd hidden on Earth, the one planet poor enough and forgotten enough that no one looked too closely at its remaining inhabitants. "I have to." Ashton gathered the tomato pieces, began removing seeds with precision that bordered on surgical. The way they phrased the reservation request: something that remembers warmth. They know, or they suspect. "And if it's a trap?" Ashton didn't answer. He reached for the basil, real basil, its scent filling the kitniks with green and alive. Some things couldn't be faked, not even with the Empire's molecular synthesizers. Some things required memory. The Karathi arrived exactly on time, which meant they were nervous. Beings who were truly powerful never worried about punctuality. Ambassador Thelrax was tall, even by Karathi standards, their chitinous plates catching the dim restaurant light in shades of deep purple. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on their angular face, scanned the room with the methodical precision of someone trained to notice details. "You're Ashton Nix." It wasn't a question. "I am." "Please sit." Ashton gestured to the table he'd prepared, the one by the window where the city's desperation looked almost beautiful in the rain. The Karathi settled into the chair with surprising grace. Up close, Ashton could see the stress fractures in their plates, the subtle discoloration that spoke of age and experience. This was someone who'd lived long enough to remember things that officially never happened. "I won't ask what you want," Ashton said quietly. "I can see it." The Karathi's primary eyes narrowed. "Can you?" "You want to remember something you've forgotten, or something someone made you forget." Ashton leaned forward slightly. "The question is whether you're ready for that to happen." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the window and the distant hum of passing air cars. Then Thelrak spoke, their voice dropping to a register that bypassed translation and went straight to emotion. My mother died 317 years ago. I was there. I held her as her plates went cold. But I can't remember her face anymore. I can't remember her voice. All the data files, all the recordings, they're not her. They're just echoes. The ambassador's hands trembled slightly. I heard rumors about a human on Earth who cooks food that does impossible things. Ashton stood. Wait here. The soup took 30 minutes to prepare properly, not because the ingredients were complex, but because each step required attention that bordered on meditation. The tomatoes, grown in specific soil, the basil, harvested at a particular time of day, the water, oh, the water was crucial, filtered through limestone that witnessed civilizations rise and fall. But those were just components. The real ingredient was something the Galactic Empire had spent 5 centuries trying to regulate, control, and ultimately ban. Memory itself.
Ashton had been young on Xyron, barely 20 standard years, when he discovered his gift. In a culture that had refined culinary arts into pure science, he'd remained stubbornly analog, insisting that food wasn't just chemical compounds triggering receptors. It was story. It was time. It was every moment that led to the instant of tasting. They'd called him a memory architect. For 15 years, he'd been the most celebrated chef in 4 sectors. Beings traveled for months just to eat at his table, to experience nostalgia for moments they'd never lived, to remember futures that might never come. Then the Empire had discovered what his food could really do, that it didn't just evoke memory, it could restore it, could bypass neural blocks, undo psychological conditioning, break through the barriers that governments erected in nines. That's when Ashton had become dangerous. He carried the soup to the table in a bowl he'd made himself from earth clay. It steamed, the scent complex and layered, comfort and longing, warmth and loss, the specific grief of time passing and the subtle joy of having something to grieve for. Thelrak stared at the bowl. "It's just soup." Taste it first. Judge after. The Karathi lifted the spoon with both hands, the gesture ceremonial. They brought it to their mouth, tasted, and began to weep. Not the quiet tears of sorrow, but the gasping, full-bodied sobs of someone who'd been holding themselves together so tightly for so long that they'd forgotten what falling apart felt like. "I see her," Thelrak whispered between sobs. "The pattern of her plates, the way she tilted her head when she was amused, her voice, her voice, singing the old songs, the ones we sang before we reached the stars and forgot why music mattered." Ashton sat across from them, saying nothing. This part was sacred. This part was why he'd risked everything to keep practicing his art. After the tears subsided, Thelrak looked up. Their 4 eyes were clearer now, as if some film had been washed away. "How?" they asked simply. Memory isn't stored in one place. It's distributed, scattered, sometimes blocked, but rarely erased completely. The right stimuli, properly combined, can trigger cascade recall. Scent is particularly effective. It bypasses logical processing, goes straight to the emotional centers. He gestured at the bowl. But it's not just chemistry. Intent matters. Attention matters. I made this soup for you specifically, Ambassador, for your loss. This is illegal in 47 sectors. 48, actually. The Delphini Concorda just updated their neural privacy laws. Thilrax studied him with new interest. And yet you risk everything to do this. Why? I looked out at the rain-soaked city. Because someone has to remember how to remember. Because when we outsource our experiences to nutrient capsules and data uploads, we lose something essential. We lose the texture of being alive. Thilrax stood, placing a credit chip on the table, far more than the meal cost. I will not report you, but others will come, Ashton Nix. Others who are not grateful. Others who want to weaponize what you do. I know. Then why stay? Ashton smiled, though there was no joy in it. Because I'm already running. Have been for 40 years. At some point, you have to make a stand for what matters. After Thilrax left, Zen's hologram materialized beside the table. That was incredibly stupid. Probably. They'll trace the credit chip. They'll know someone was here, someone who can afford that kind of payment. I know. Zen's form flickered with frustration, or what passed for frustration in a consciousness pattern. You want to be found. After all this time, you actually want them to catch you. Ashton began clearing the table. Maybe I'm just tired of hiding who I am. Or maybe you're hoping she'll come. He froze, the bowl in his hands. They never talked about her. Not in 40 years. She won't remember me, he said quietly. They made sure of that. Memory can be restored, Zen said softly. You proved it tonight.
She arrived 3 days later, during the morning hours when the restaurant was supposedly closed. Ashton was in the greenhouse, tending to the tomatoes, when the door chimed. He almost ignored it. Tourists rarely came before noon, and the locals couldn't afford his prices. But something made him look up. Through the greenhouse's glass walls, he could see her in the restaurant below. Tall, angular, with the precise posture of someone who'd spent years in military service. Her uniform was imperial gray, decorated with the subtle insignia of the Investigation Corps. She was looking at the photograph on the wall, the one Ashton had kept despite knowing the risk. A younger version of himself standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a smile that suggested she knew secrets worth keeping. Ashton descended the stairs slowly, giving himself time to steady his breathing. 40 years of preparation, and he still wasn't ready for this moment. "Inspector," he said neutrally, "I'm afraid we don't open until—" "Inspector Kayla Nix, Imperial Investigation Corps, Neural Crimes Division." She turned to face him, and Ashton felt the universe tilt. Same eyes, same expression when concentrating. She'd gotten their mother's cheekbones, his father's stubborn jaw. She'd gotten nothing of her father except his name. "I'm investigating reports of illegal memory manipulation in this sector. Several witnesses have described experiences consistent with unauthorized neural cascade triggers. All trails lead here. I run a restaurant. I cook food. You do more than that." She moved closer, and Ashton could see the intelligence in her gaze, the sharpness that probably made her excellent at her job. "I've studied your file, Mr. Nix, or should I call you Remembrancer Ashton, as they used to on Xiron?" That was a long time ago. 42 years, 4 months, 17 days. Kayla pulled out a data pad. "The day you disappeared from Xiron. The same day a memory architect named Ashton and his infant daughter vanished from all official records. Impressive work. The erasure must have cost every credit you had." Ashton said nothing. In his pocket, his hand found the small photograph he always carried. "Kayla, at 6 months old, laughing at something just off camera. The last picture before he'd had to give her up, place her with a family who could keep her safe from people who'd use a memory architect's daughter as leverage. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why come now after all this time?" Something flickered across Kayla's face, confusion quickly suppressed. "I go where the investigation leads." "Do you?" Ashton moved behind the bar, began preparing tea without asking if she wanted any. Some habits ran deeper than danger. Or did something trigger this particular interest? A case that seemed familiar somehow. A set of evidence that felt personal even though you couldn't explain why. "Stop!" Kayla's voice was sharp. "Whatever you're implying, I'm not implying anything. I'm asking if you've been having dreams." She went very still. "Dreams of a restaurant," Ashton continued, his hand steady as he poured water over tea leaves. "Dreams of someone teaching you to taste properly, to notice layers, to understand that food is storytelling." He looked up. "Dreams of someone who loved you absolutely." "Those aren't real memories. My parents died when I was 2, transport accident." "Is that what they told you?" "It's in my file. It's been verified." "Files can be altered. Memories can be suppressed." Ashton set the tea in front of her. "But they can also be restored. That's what scares the Empire, Inspector. Not that I can make people nostalgic, that I can help them remember truths that powerful people need forgotten." Kayla stared at the tea. "This is a manipulation attempt. You're trying to compromise an active investigation." "I'm trying to give my daughter back her history." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Kayla's hand trembled slightly as it moved toward the teacup, then stopped. "If you drink that," Ashton said quietly, "you'll remember. Everything they took from you. Everything I had to let them take. Because keeping you meant watching you become a weapon aimed at everyone I was trying to protect." "And if I don't drink it?" "Then you file your report. You shut down the restaurant. You go back to your life believing the comfortable lies." Ashton sat down across from her. "Either way, I won't run. Not this time." Kayla picked up the cup, held it. The scent rose between them, complex, multi-layered, carrying notes of things that couldn't be named but only felt. "Why?" she asked. "Why give me up if you were so certain you could hide?" "Because they didn't want me. They wanted what I represented. The possibility that people could reclaim experiences the Empire had packaged and sold back to them in sanitized form. But you were innocent. You deserved a life that wasn't defined by my choices. So you made the choice for me. Yes, and I've regretted it every day since." Kayla raised the cup to her lips, paused. "If what you're saying is true, if I drink this and remember, what then? I'm still an Imperial Inspector. I still have duties, laws I've sworn to uphold." "Then you'll have to decide which duty matters more, the one to an institution or the one to truth." She drank.
The memory restoration wasn't gentle. Kayla gasped, the cup falling from her hands, shattering against the floor in a sound that seemed too loud, too final. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating, and Ashton was already moving, catching her as she fell forward. "I've got you," he whispered, lowering her carefully to the floor. "I've got you, little star, just like always." Little Star. The nickname hit her like a physical blow. She could remember now, being 3 years old, pointing at the night sky visible through the restaurant's dome, asking what the lights were. Him explaining stars with the patience of someone who understood that teaching was the highest form of love. But that wasn't the implanted memory. The file said she'd been with another family by then. The file was wrong. Images cascaded through her mind, each one sharp and undeniable. Being 5, standing on a chair beside him in the kit, Nick's, learning to crack eggs, his hands guiding hers. Gently, Kayla. Everything in cooking is about respect for the ingredients, for the people who'll eat what you make, for the story you're telling. Being 7, crying because kids at school had mocked her for not having a mother. Him holding her, saying, "You had a mother. She loved you fiercer than starfire. And every day I cook, I try to honor her memory by teaching you what she taught me, that food is how we tell people they matter." Being 9, the night the enforcers came, the terrible sounds, him hiding her in the cold storage, pressing a small device into her hands. "Remember me," he whispered. "No matter what they do, no matter what they tell you, remember." And then nothing. A gap. Years erased. She remembered waking up at 12 in a family that felt wrong but claimed to be right. Remembered dreams of a restaurant that therapists assured her was fabricated, stress-induced. Remembered acing every test in the Imperial Academy, becoming the perfect investigator, never understanding why she felt incomplete. Remembered 40 years of living someone else's designed life. "How?" she managed to ask, still on the floor, Ashton kneeling beside her. "How long for what? How long have you known I was coming?" Ashton smiled sadly. "About 3 days, when you started asking questions about this sector. Your investigation pattern was too precise, too focused, like something was guiding you here without your conscious knowledge. The memory suppression isn't complete. It never is. The brain is resilient. It wants to remember, wants to be whole." He helped her sit up. "The question is what you want to do about it." Kayla looked at her hands. They were shaking. "I've spent 30 years serving the Empire, believing in its mission, in the necessity of neural privacy laws, memory protection protocols. And you're telling me it was all built on a lie? That the Empire that rescued me from a dangerous fugitive actually stole me from my father? Not just you, thousands like you. The Empire doesn't ban memory manipulation because it's dangerous. They ban it because it threatens their control. Because someone who can truly remember, who can access the full depths of their experiences, is harder to manipulate, harder to govern. And you've been fighting them alone for 40 years? Not fighting, preserving." Ashton gestured at the restaurant. "Every meal I serve, every person I help remember who they really are, that's an act of resistance. Small, maybe, but genuine." Kayla stood, her investigator's mind already working through implications. "The Kyarthi ambassador, they'll have filed a report with the diplomatic corps. Protocol requires emotional incident documentation." "I know." "Which means a full investigation team will be here within 48 hours. "I know that too." "Then why? Why blew your cover now? Why not just keep hiding, keep helping people quietly?" Ashton met her eyes. "I was tired of running, and because I wanted my daughter back, even if it meant risking everything else." The weight of that hit her. He'd sacrificed 40 decades of safety for the chance to restore her memory, to give her back a self she'd been designed to forget. "You're an idiot," she said, but there was no heat in it. "So people keep telling me." They stood in silence, broken glass between them,
the city's rain drumming against the windows like an audience waiting for the next act. Finally, Kayla spoke. I can't unknow this. Can't go back to being who I was yesterday. No. And if I file an accurate report, I'll have to arrest you, shut this down, follow the law I've served my entire adult life. Yes. But if I don't, she let the sentence hang. Ashton waited. This had to be her choice. Everything else had been taken from her. She deserved at least this moment of genuine decision. Teach me, Kayla said suddenly. Before they come, before this ends, teach me what you do, how you do it, so that even if they shut you down, the knowledge survives. Ashton felt something in his chest unlock, a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. That would take years. We have maybe 2 days. Then we'd better not waste time.
They worked through the night and into the next day, the restaurant transforming into something between a classroom and a laboratory. Kayla proved an apt student. Her investigator's attention to detail translated well into the precision required for true memory cooking. It's not just about the ingredients, Ashton explained, demonstrating how to butterfly a fish that had cost more than most people earned in a month. It's about understanding what memory feels like. Tastes have texture, yes, but they also have emotional resonance. A properly prepared meal doesn't just remind you of something, it helps you re-experience it, live it again from inside. Kayla watched his hands. Is that what makes it illegal, the re-experiencing? Partially, but the real threat is specificity. He set the fish aside, began gathering herbs. The Empire's memory suppression works because it's broad, institutional. They can scrub entire populations of inconvenient histories if they do it slowly enough, systematically enough. But I can target, can restore specific memories in specific people. Making you dangerous to anyone with something to hide? Making me dangerous to the entire control structure. Ashton ground herbs with a mortar and pestle, the motion rhythmic and meditative. Power rests on collective amnesia, on populations forgetting they ever had alternatives, ever chose differently. Memory is revolution's first requirement. As dawn broke on the second day, Zen's hologram appeared, flickering with agitation. They're coming! I'm detecting Imperial cruiser signatures entering orbit, multiple ships. Kayla and Ashton exchanged looks. They'd known this moment would arrive, but knowing and experiencing remained profoundly different. How long? Ashton asked. 2 hours, maybe 3 if we're lucky. Then we have time for one last service. What are you talking about? Kayla frowned. Ashton moved to the restaurant's comm system, began broadcasting on multiple frequencies, some legal, some decidedly not. Attention, all beings currently on Earth or in near orbit. The memory table will be hosting a final service tonight at sunset. No reservations, no payment required. All are welcome. Come hungry, come ready to remember. You're insane, Zen said flatly. You're inviting witnesses to your own arrest. I'm inviting people to remember why we do this. Ashton turned to Kayla. Help me prepare. We'll need at least 50. 50? Kayla stared at him. We don't have supplies for... We will. Trust me. She did. That was the strange part. After 40 years of manipulated memory and institutional loyalty, trusting a father she barely remembered should have been impossible. But something deeper than memory recognized him. Bone-deep certainty that this man had spent 40 years in exile for her safety. If he said they'd manage, they'd manage. By sunset, the restaurant was packed beyond capacity. Beings of a dozen species crowded the tables, spilled into the aisles, stood in doorways. Some Kayla recognized, refugees she'd investigated over the years. individuals flagged for memory inconsistencies. Others were strangers, drawn by curiosity or rumor or desperate hope. And in the corner, barely visible through the crowd, Kayla spotted Imperial uniforms. They'd come early, were watching, documenting everything. Ashton moved through the chaos with surprising calm, carrying plates, offering explanations, treating this final service like any other, except it wasn't. Every dish he served was tailored, specific, a lifetime's worth of skill poured into these last offerings. To an elderly Delphini couple, he brought soup that tasted of their homeworld's oceans before the ecological collapse. They held hands across the table, weeping openly. To a young human refugee from the outer colonies, he served bread that carried the scent of her grandmother's kitniks, destroyed 30 years ago in the border wars. She ate slowly, reverently, as though each bite was a prayer. To the Kairathi ambassador who had returned despite the danger, he presented a dessert made with crystallized honey that somehow captured the exact quality of their mother's laughter. And to his daughter, working beside him in the kitniks, he whispered instructions that were really history lessons, recipes that were really love letters, techniques that were really ways of saying, "This is who we are. This is what we preserve. This is why it matters." As the evening deepened, the lead Imperial investigator finally stood, their uniform crisp despite the crowded heat. "Ashton Nex, formerly known as Remembrance or Ashton of Xiron. You are under arrest for violation of the Galactic Memory Protection Act, Section 47, subsections 12 through 89. Any resistance will be met with, 'I'm not resisting.'" Ashton set down the ladle he'd been using, wiped his hands carefully on his apron. "But I'd like to finish service first. Professional courtesy." The investigator's expression suggested they'd been prepared for many responses except calm politeness. "That's not protocol. Neither is arresting someone in the middle of dinner service, but here we are. 45 minutes, that's all I need. Surely the Empire can wait 45 minutes to dismantle something that's taken 40 years to build." Tension hung in the air. The investigator could force the issue, arrest Ashton immediately. But something about the moment, the crowded restaurant, the watching beings of a dozen species, the strange sanctity of a last meal, stayed their hand. 45 minutes, they conceded. "Then you're coming with us." Ashton bowed slightly. "Thank you. Inspector Nix, if you'd help me with the final course." Kayla froze. He'd just publicly identified her, drawn her into this, made her complicit in front of her colleagues. But she also understood what he was really saying. Choose, right now, who you are, what you believe, what you're willing to sacrifice. She stepped forward, took the serving tray he offered. "Of course." Together, they brought out the final course. Ashton had prepared something different for each table, but the underlying principle remained constant. Every dish invited those eating to reclaim something taken from them, a moment of joy before suppression, a piece of identity before conformity, a truth before convenient lies. And as they ate, something shifted in the room. Not revolution exactly, not dramatic uprising, but a collective recognition, a shared moment of resistance so subtle and profound that the Imperial agents recording everything couldn't quite document what was happening. People were remembering how to remember, were choosing authenticity over comfort, were deciding that some truths mattered more than safety. When the 45 minutes ended, Ashton removed his apron, folded it carefully, and placed it in Kayla's hands. "The recipes are in the greenhouse," he said quietly, "encoded in the soil composition. Everything you need to continue is there, if you want to." She's voice broke. "I can't do this without you." "Yes, you can. You're my daughter.
which means you're stubborn enough to preserve what matters, even when it's dangerous. He smiled. Especially when it's dangerous. The Imperial agents moved forward. Ashton went without resistance, walking toward the door with the dignity of someone who'd made peace with consequences. But as he reached the threshold, Kayla spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Inspector Kayla Nix, Imperial Investigation Corps, formally resigning my commission effective immediately." The room went silent. The lead investigator turned, incredulous. "You can't." "I absolutely can. Regulation 3377, subsection B. Any inspector may resign for ethical conflicts with institutional mission." I pulled her badge from her uniform, set it on the nearest table. "I'm declaring an ethical conflict. This arrest violates every principle I joined the Corps to uphold." "You're throwing away your career, your pension, everything." "No, I'm remembering what I actually believe in. Funny how that happens when someone helps you reclaim your memory." The investigator looked between Kayla and Ashton, clearly calculating the political nightmare of arresting both a decorated memory architect and a formally respected inspector. The news feeds would devour this, questions would be asked, investigations into investigations. "Both of you are coming in," they finally decided. "We'll let Central sort this out." Ashton met Kayla's eyes. In that glance, past 40 years of regret, 2 days of recovered connection, and a strange, fierce hope. They'd lost so much time, but they had this moment, this choice, this declaration that some things, memory, truth, love, were worth any price. The Imperial agents led them toward the door. But as they left, Ashton looked back at the crowded restaurant one last time, at the beings still eating, still remembering, still choosing to be fully themselves despite the costs. "Worth it," he said softly. And beside him, her hand finding his, Kayla answered, "Every moment."
3 years later, Earth remained the poorest planet in the galactic community. But tourists came now for different reasons. Not nostalgia for a primitive past, but hunger for something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to provide. Authentic experience, real memory, meals that tasted like truth. The memory table had been shut down, of course. Ashton and Kayla had spent 18 months in Imperial custody, undergoing rehabilitation that mostly involved bureaucrats trying to understand how two people could willingly sacrifice everything for principle. They had been released eventually. Public pressure, complicated politics, a growing movement questioning memory protection laws. Released with permanent monitoring, forbidden from practicing their art. But recipes, it turned out, were harder to suppress than people. All across the galaxy, small restaurants began appearing, some hidden, some surprisingly public, places where proprietors understood that food was more than fuel, where meals carried meaning beyond nutrition. The Imperial authorities investigated, of course, tried to trace the source, but the knowledge had been encoded carefully, distributed widely, hidden in places bureaucrats wouldn't think to look. Soil composition, star charts, even the molecular structure of certain heirloom seeds. On Earth, in a small apartment overlooking New Shanghai's perpetual rain, Ashton taught his daughter the art of preservation. Not cooking, exactly. Something deeper. How to encode memory in gesture. How to pass on history through shared experience. How to resist forgetting in a galaxy devoted to controlled amnesia. And occasionally, when they thought the monitors weren't watching too closely, they'd prepare a meal. Not for payment. Not for recognition, simply because some acts of creation couldn't be stopped by legislation or surveillance. Because resistance, at its core, was about choosing authenticity, even when conformity promised safety. One evening, as purple twilight settled over the city, there came a knock at their door. Ashton opened it to find Ambassador Thelrax standing in the corridor, looking significantly older than their last meeting. The stress fractures in their chitinous plates had deepened, spreading like rivers across ancient stone. "I heard you were released," the Kairathi said simply. "We were, with conditions." Ashton gestured them inside. "You shouldn't be here. Association with us could damage your diplomatic standing." "My diplomatic standing," Thelrax replied, "has already been damaged beyond repair. It seems I made the mistake of remembering too much, asking too many questions, wondering aloud whether the Galactic Council's memory protection policies served people or merely controlled them." Kayla appeared from the Kit Nikes, recognizing their visitor immediately. "They removed you from your post." "Voluntarily resigned, though the voluntariness was, shall we say, heavily suggested." The ambassador settled into the worn chair Ashton offered. "I've spent the past 3 years traveling, documenting, discovering how many beings across the galaxy have fragments of suppressed memory, pieces of themselves they've been conditioned to ignore. Dangerous work. Essential work." The ambassador pulled a small data crystal from his robes. "I've compiled testimony from over 4,000 individuals, each one describing experiences similar to mine. Memories restored through food, through music, through art that the Empire considers illegal. Each one evidence that what you preserved isn't an aberration. It's fundamental to who we are as sentient beings." Kayla took the crystal carefully. "What do you want us to do with this?" "Keep it. Hide it. Preserve it the way you preserve everything else." The ambassador's 4 eyes held a depth of exhaustion and determination. "Because the Council is proposing new legislation. Universal memory standardization. Every being in Imperial space would undergo optimization, removal of traumatic memories, enhancement of productive ones, adjustment of personality towards social cohesion." "They're proposing to remake consciousness itself," Ashton said quietly.
And they'll sell it as progress, as healing, as the final solution to mental illness, social conflict, cultural friction. Thelrax leaned forward. "The vote happens in 6 months. If it passes, everything you've fought to preserve becomes impossible. Not just illegal, physically impossible. The technology exists to make forgetting permanent." The weight of that settled over the room. Ashton had spent 40 years fighting for the right to remember authentically. If the Council succeeded, that fight would become irrelevant. You couldn't preserve what had been technologically erased. "There's something else," Thelrax continued. "The proposal includes a clause, a pilot program. They want to start with Earth." "Of course they do." Kayla's voice was bitter. "The poorest planet, the least politically connected. Who would protest?" "More beings than you'd think." The ambassador stood. "I'm organizing a coalition. Diplomats, scientists, artists, anyone who understands what's at stake. We're calling it the Authenticity Movement." "Terrible name," Ashton observed. "Suggestions welcome." Thelrax moved toward the door, then paused. "There's going to be a hearing before the Council vote. They're allowing public testimony, limited slots. I've secured one for you, Ashton, if you want it."
What would I say that hasn't already been said? You'd tell the truth about what was taken from you, from your daughter, from every being who's been told their memories are dangerous. Sometimes the most radical act is simply witnessing, saying, this happened, this matters, this is worth preserving. After Thelrax left, Ashton Kayla sat in silence. Through the window, they could see Earth's poverty, the crumbling infrastructure, the outdated technology, the desperate beauty of a world the galaxy had moved beyond. "Are you going to testify?" Kayla finally asked. Ashton considered. Testifying meant visibility, meant painting a target on their backs even larger than before, meant risking the fragile peace they'd managed to build in these 3 years. But it also meant bearing witness, meant standing for the principle that some things, memory, identity, the right to one's own history, transcended political convenience. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I am."
The Galactic Council chamber was vast enough to hold representatives from 700 worlds, each suspended in their own atmospheric bubble to accommodate the wildly different environmental needs of member species. Ashton had seen recordings of council sessions, but nothing prepared him for the physical reality, the sheer scale of organized civilization, the weight of collective governance. He felt very small. The hearing chamber was less intimidating, but no less significant. Tiered seating surrounded a central platform where witnesses stood to give testimony. Every word would be recorded, analyzed, archived in databases that would outlast civilizations. Ashton climbed the platform steps carefully, aware of Kayla watching from the gallery, of Thelrax seated among the diplomatic observers, of Zhen's consciousness pattern running silently in the data crystal he carried. The Galactic Arbiter, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline form, spoke in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. Witness Ashton Nix, formerly of Xiron, currently of Earth. You may present your testimony regarding Proposal 847, Universal Memory Standardization. Ashton cleared his throat. He'd prepared remarks, written speeches, practiced elegant arguments. But standing here, facing the assembled weight of galactic authority, he found himself discarding all of it. "I'm a cook. That's all I've ever been. I learned early that food is more than fuel. It's communication. It's art. It's how we tell each other, you matter. Your experience matters. Who you are matters." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I was young on Xiron, I discovered I had a gift. I could craft meals that helped people remember things they'd forgotten. Not manufacture false memories, restore genuine ones that had been suppressed or lost. The Empire called this dangerous, called me dangerous, and maybe they were right." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ashton continued, "Because memory is dangerous. It's inconvenient. It reminds us of mistakes we'd rather forget, truths we'd rather ignore, versions of ourselves that don't fit current narratives. Memory is messy and complicated and often painful. It's also essential." His voice strengthened. "Proposal 847 promises optimization, freedom from trauma, enhanced social cohesion. It sounds merciful, humane. But here's what it actually means: the systematic erasure of any experience deemed inconvenient by those in power. The transformation of consciousness itself into something manageable, predictable, controlled. You'll say this is paranoia, that proper safeguards exist, that the Council would never abuse such authority.
Ashton met the Arbiter's crystalline gaze directly. But I've spent 40 years running from people who already abuse exactly that authority. I've met thousands of beings whose memories were suppressed without consent, whose identities were adjusted for political convenience, whose lives were rewritten to serve institutional narratives. My daughter, he gestured toward Kayla, spent 30 years living someone else's designed existence because I was inconvenient, because what I represented threatened structures of control. The Empire didn't torture her, didn't imprison her. They simply gave her a different history and told her it was real. Can you imagine anything more violating than that? The chamber had gone quiet. Ashton pressed on.
If Proposal 847 passes, that violation becomes universal, permanent. You won't just suppress memories, you'll make genuine remembering impossible. You'll create populations that can't access their own histories, can't question their own programming, can't imagine alternatives to what they're told is natural and inevitable. And you'll do it in the name of healing. He pulled the data crystal from his pocket, held it up. This contains testimony from over 4,000 beings, each one describing memory suppression, each one evidence that what you're proposing isn't progress. It's the logical conclusion of 50 years of creeping control. The difference is scale and permanence. But here's what your proposal can't account for. Memory is resilient. Consciousness is resilient. The fundamental human, and I use human here to mean all sentient beings, the fundamental need to be authentically ourselves resists every attempt to standardize it. You can suppress memory, but you can't eliminate the capacity to remember. You can erase history, but you can't erase the need for history. Ashton set the data crystal on the platform carefully. I'm just a cook. I make soup. I bake bread. I help people taste things that remind them who they are. That's all I've ever done. But apparently, that's revolutionary enough to warrant 40 years of exile and 18 months of imprisonment. If something as simple as authentic food threatens your system this much, maybe the problem isn't the food. Maybe it's the system. He took a breath. Vote however you want. Pass Proposal 847. Create your perfect, optimized, standardized populations. But understand what you're destroying. Not just individual memories, but the capacity for genuine experience. Not just inconvenient histories, but the possibility of learning from them. Not just messy humanity, but humanity itself. And know that no matter what legislation you pass, no matter what technology you deploy, there will always be people like me, preserving, remembering, resisting, because some things are too fundamental to be regulated away. Memory is one of them. Ashton stepped down from the platform. He'd said what needed saying. The rest was beyond his control. As he moved toward the exit, something unexpected happened. One being in the gallery stood, then another, then a dozen, then hundreds, not applauding, that would have been inappropriate in council chambers, but standing in silent acknowledgement. Even some council members rose from their seats. Kayla met him at the chamber doors, her eyes bright with tears. That was probably futile, Ashton interrupted gently. But necessary. He smiled. That too.
The vote on Proposal 847 failed by the narrowest margin in council history, just 17 votes out of 700 members. The legislation was sent back for revision, its most invasive clauses flagged for further study, its implementation timeline extended indefinitely. It wasn't victory, it was delay. But sometimes delay was enough. In the aftermath, something shifted across the galaxy. Small at first, barely noticeable against the vast machinery of Imperial administration, but growing. Restaurants began appearing openly.
Not hidden speakeasies or underground operations, but legitimate establishments practicing what they called experiential cuisine, food prepared with intention, attention, memory. The empire attempted to regulate them, but public demand proved overwhelming. People, it turned out, were hungry for authenticity. Artists across a dozen worlds began incorporating memory techniques into their work. Musicians composing pieces that triggered specific recollections. Sculptors creating forms that somehow embodied emotional histories. Writers crafting stories that weren't just entertainment, but genuine memory preservation. The authenticity movement, despite its terrible name, grew into something larger than anyone had anticipated. Not a political party or organized resistance, but a collective shift, a cultural decision that standardization, however convenient, cost too much. And on Earth, in a small apartment overlooking New Shanghai's eternal reign, Ashton and Kayla continued their work, quietly, carefully, teaching anyone willing to learn that memory was a skill, remembering was a practice, and authenticity was a choice available to anyone brave enough to make it. One evening, 5 years after the council testimony, Ashton stood in what had become their unofficial school, a converted warehouse where a dozen students practiced the subtle art of memory cooking. He watched Kayla demonstrate proper technique to a young Delphini chef, her movements confident now, her understanding complete. She'd surpassed him months ago. That filled him with profound satisfaction. "You did good," Zen's hologram said beside him. "We did good," Ashton corrected. "All of us. Do you think it will last, this renaissance of authentic experience?" Ashton considered. Outside the warehouse, Earth's poverty persisted. The galaxy's inequality continued. Power structures remained largely unchanged. But something fundamental had shifted. A recognition that some forms of wealth couldn't be measured in credits or controlled by legislation.
"I think," he said slowly, "that we've reminded people of something they knew already but had forgotten. That being fully alive means remembering fully, feeling fully, experiencing the complete range of what consciousness offers, even when it's painful." That's a very philosophical answer. I'm old. I'm allowed to be philosophical. Zen's form flickered with amusement. You're 67. That's barely middle-aged by galactic standards. Then I'm allowed to be prematurely philosophical. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the students work. Some would become remarkable practitioners. Others would simply carry the principles forward into different fields, different applications. But all of them understood now that memory wasn't enemy, it was foundation. A message chimed on Ashton's communicator. He checked it, then smiled. "What?" Zen asked. "Ambassador Thelrax. They're opening a diplomatic institute focused on cultural memory preservation. Want me to serve as senior advisor. Will you accept?" Ashton looked at his daughter, teaching with the patient precision he'd taught her. At the students, young beings from a dozen worlds, learning arts the Empire had tried to erase. At the city outside, poor but genuine, struggling but authentic. "No," he said finally. "My work is here, teaching, preserving, making sure that what we've protected survives us." Very noble. Very practical. The real revolution isn't in councils or institutions. It's in kitnixes, in classrooms, in every small space where people choose authenticity over convenience. Zen's hologram solidified slightly, her way of expressing approval. "Then I suppose we'd better get dinner started. Those students will be hungry after practice." "They're always hungry," Ashton agreed. "Comes with being young." Together they moved toward the kitnix. Behind them, Kayla's voice carried clearly, explaining to her students the fundamental principle that Ashton had spent a lifetime learning and now passed forward. Memory isn't about the past, it's about presence, being fully here, fully aware, fully alive in this moment. When you cook with that understanding, you're not just feeding people, you're helping them remember how to be human. Or Kairathi, or Delphini, or whatever form consciousness took. The specifics didn't matter, the principle was universal. Outside, Earth's rain continued falling, but inside the warehouse, warmth spread, the kind that came from shared purpose, collective meaning, the revolutionary act of choosing to remember together. It wasn't the future Ashton had imagined 40 years ago when he'd fled Xiron with an infant daughter. It was better, because it was real, unoptimized, perfectly, messily, beautifully authentic. And that, Ashton thought, as he began preparing the evening meal, was worth preserving. Worth everything.